Well, I'm glad you're here. We have a fantastic section of Scripture tonight. It is one of everybody's favorites. It's one that I've heard misused at weddings time and time again, and I think you will really enjoy taking a look at it tonight. We're going to take a look at it, though. I really want to do our best to view 1 Corinthians chapter 13 in context rather than pulling it out and setting it aside like we so often want to do. We have to keep in mind this is a letter that Paul wrote to a church to answer questions and concerns, and this is simply part of that letter. And so we're going to look at it that way tonight. We'll maybe do a little more dissecting and such on Sunday, but we're going to try to see it in context tonight. So before we do, let's stop and pray. Lord, I pray that you would speak clearly tonight. We don't want to overstep the charge that you've given us with our own opinions. We want to hear directly from you. We know that Paul was a man just like me. However, you inspired him and led him in this way, and we ask that you would inspire and lead us tonight to understand what you have recorded for us for all time. We thank you. Amen. Amen. You know, we were just talking about how Hayden is going to Northwest Nazarene University. As a matter of fact, this Sunday will be his last Sunday here. So we'll have to throw cupcakes at him or something as he leaves. But anyway, we were talking about how he is heading to NNU, and it's reminding me, Addie, of course, just finished there, same school, totally different program, but same school. And as a result of Addie being over at NNU, particularly this last year, I ended up over there in Nampa a lot. It seemed like I was in Nampa a lot. Some of it was for Addie, and some of it was for other things, for the church and whatnot. It just felt like every month or two I was flying to Nampa. And the interesting thing is, going over there, even if I wasn't going for Addie, she would indicate something that she needed, living in an apartment her senior year, and oh my, she doesn't have, this cooking supply, or she doesn't have this household supply, or whatever it might be. And I knew right where to go to get it. Depending on what she needed, I knew where to go to get it. If she needed some groceries and maybe some other non-grocery items, I knew we could run over to Fred Meyer, pick it up. Fred Meyer in Nampa, I knew what they would have there at Fred Meyer in Nampa already. I just knew what they would have. There was one time that she needed some obscure cooking supply of some, and by needed, if it's a cooking supply, Addie needed it. This wasn't a luxury. She must have it. So I knew that the place to go was Bed Bath & Beyond. And so we went over to Bed Bath & Beyond, and sure enough, there it was. One time I came over, and she just needed like some general non-food shopping items, just some general items, and she said, Dad, I hate to do this while you're here, but I got to go shopping. I said, well, it'll be fun. We'll go together. What do you need? And she showed me her list, and I said, oh, we'll just run over to Walmart. Because I knew that what she needed, Ziploc baggies and whatever else, they would have at Walmart. It would be a reasonable price. I could get it all in one spot. It would be great. I knew that. Having not been to the Walmart in Nampa before, I knew that. Having not been to the Bed Bath & Beyond, which is actually, I think, in Meridian, I knew what it would have. I knew that I could get it there. Because that's how chain stores work. I always know what to expect. The same can be said for many churches. If I told you that this morning, rather than attending the Church of the Nazarene Sunday morning, rather than attending the Church of the Nazarene, we were going to take a field trip together, and we were all going to head over to First Baptist Church. I don't even have to tell you what town. You already know what to expect. We better dress a little nicer, bring something for the potluck, and plan on being slightly uncomfortable hearing some hymns. I mean, we know what to expect. If I told you, oh, I'm kidding, we're not going to First Baptist, we're going to the Episcopalian Church. Well, you might know exactly, you better sit up straight. You better be prepared to pretend you're Catholic. If you're going to go to the Episcopalian, if I told you we were going to the Lutheran Church, you know that you'd better be prepared to read a bulletin for an hour and a half and feel incredibly guilty. Because that's what you do there. If I told you we were going to the Calvary Chapel, I got to pick on those guys. Then you'd know that you can wake up about 5 minutes before you leave and just throw on whatever you want and show up. Right? We know what to expect. Now, the Church of the Nazarene, I find, is not quite that similar church to church. For one reason, because there are more Church of the Nazarene churches outside of the United States and Canada than inside of the United States and Canada. So the flavor of the Church of the Nazarene is pretty international. And also, the way that churches of the Nazarene are designed is to be more of a reflection of their community in cultural flavor rather than try to impose something on the community. So, here in our church, we're about a 70-30 mix of Caucasian and Latino because that exactly matches our community. We're a little bit older, a little bit more reserved. That exactly matches our community. You head down into the Church of the Nazarene in downtown Seattle, you're going to see something different. You go to the Church of the Nazarene in Toronto, Canada, you're going to see something different. But for the most part, you know what to expect. You know what to expect. You know which songs are probably going to happen. You know how much time is probably going to be spent on preaching. You have an idea what you're going to feel like when you leave. Not if you went to Corinth. If you were on vacation in the first century in the town of Corinth, you might know what to expect when you went shopping at the market. But you would not know what to expect when you walked into First Christian Church in downtown Corinth. First of all, you'd have to decide which church you were going to in Corinth. Now, they were all Christian churches, but there was the church according to Paul, and there was the church according to Apollos, and there was the church according to Cephas, and there was the church according to who knows, some guy that stopped in last week named Steve, and then there's the church according to Christ. So you'd have to determine which one you were going to go to. Now, once you determined which one you were going to go to, you're probably going to be surprised when you walk in. You see, the church in Corinth, well, they didn't show up and have greeting time and then welcome and announcements and then 3 songs and offering and then 2 more songs and prayer and pass the plate for communion and then preaching and then a closing song and everyone leave. They didn't do that. They really reflected more what you'd find in a pagan worship service in that area. And in a pagan worship service, things were not so orderly. First of all, to properly worship Aphrodite or Poseidon or Herodias, the 3 gods that were false gods that were celebrated there, in order to properly worship them, you're going to have to show up inebriated. So at least somewhat drunk, or really even better if you could find some sort of recreational drug to be on when you showed up to the worship service. That would help. Secondly, the more vivacious you can be, the louder, the more interrupting that you can be, the more you can run around and hoot and holler as this pagan worship service is going on, the better. If you can get some attention on you for your vivaciousness, you're doing quite well at a pagan worship service. Since Aphrodite was considered a chief goddess of the community, women always played a big role in the worship services. It was not a positive role. They were remarkably demonstrative and expressive in their femininity, if you will. If you were worshiping Poseidon up on the hill, then the women would generally just be naked as they shouted and hooted and hollered and made as much noise to get as much attention on them as possible. Matter of fact, if you were going to a pagan worship service to try to focus on whatever the god was, that's not good luck. That's not going to happen. Because the services were raucous. And when the Christian people became Christian people from Corinth, a majority of them came from these pagan backgrounds. Now, I know that many of them came from a Jewish background, which was very orderly, but they kind of had an idea what to expect when worshiping with Gentiles, and they figured it was going to be pretty wild. And that's what happened. And if you walk into a Church of the Nazarene today in Italy, there's a couple of them in Sicily, Wendy and I found the other day, or if you would go to one in South Korea, or over in New Zealand, or in Brazil, or in New Hampshire, you're going to find something you expect to find. But if you went to Corinth, you'd wonder what's wrong with these people. Now imagine being someone who is interested in Christianity. And you say, you know, I've heard about this Jesus, and I'd really like to know more. I think I'm going to stop into Third Christian Church on Main Street in Corinth on a Sunday morning to see if I can discover more about this Christ. And you walked in and saw that going on. It's not going to work real well. And so Paul wrote to them, and he said, I'd really like to talk to you about some spiritual things, but first we got to deal with some carnal things. You guys are just running over each other to try and be as carnal as possible. And don't you realize you were called out of that to be a Christian? And now that we've settled these issues by the time we get up into chapters 10 and 11, he says, I'd like to talk to you about some spiritual things as we get into chapter 12. And if we're going to talk about spiritual things, he says, you need to understand, chapter 14, verse 23, that God is a God of order, not of chaos. And if your worship services are going to reflect the God you say you worship, then your worship services are going to have to be ordered. Now, there's one particular area that they struggled with quite a bit, and it's an area we struggle with a lot. And that would be the area of, I guess you could call it spiritual manifestations. What do spiritual things look like? Because really, when it comes right down to it, what separates a Christian from a pagan, a Corinthian might say? What Christian things might a Christian person do that a pagan might not do? Well, I know what a Christian person would do. A Christian person would prophesy, would say the words of God. A Christian person would speak in all kinds of other languages, like they did in Acts chapter 2. A Christian person would do that. A Christian person would very openly be involved in all kinds of Christian spiritual experiences. We know what a spiritual experience with Aphrodite is. We're going to express spiritual experiences that Christians would experience, and they begin chasing after spiritual experiences. Now, I have a feeling that when Paul taught them initially, he might have kind of goofed in that. Because they were experience-seeking people, I think maybe he kind of stressed, well, yeah, there are some experiences that go with Christianity. I mean, he gave some to be prophets, and some to be apostles, and some to be teachers, and some to be evangelists, and some to be the other one that I still don't remember. There are some experiences that go with that. Pastors. That's awesome that I can't remember that one. There are some experiences that go along with that, he tells them. And they begin chasing desperately after those experiences to the point that they begin losing focus on the person and the attributes of Christ. So they become experiential people, spiritual people, instead of Christian people. Now, I think that's really important for us to know because, honestly, I think that we have many of those same issues even today. On April 9th, 1906, a pastor by the last name of Seymour was praying with 7 other men on Azusa Street in Los Angeles. And as they were praying, the Holy Spirit did something fantastic in their lives. And they said they were all knocked off their chairs and fell on the floor. And the 7 other men began speaking in tongues. And 2 days later, so did Pastor Seymour. And that began what's known as the Azusa Street Revival period, which lasted, by the way, from 1906 to 1915. Many very good things came out of the Azusa Street revival period. One of the things that came out of that is the entirety of the Pentecostal movement in the United States. And say what you will about the Pentecostal movement. I don't care if you support it or not. I don't care if you feel that it's genuine or not. That's not the point of this discussion. The point of this discussion is that a negative byproduct came out of that. A negative byproduct is people seeking experiences. And we have some of that in the Church of the Nazarene. People who say, I've been particularly convicted by this sermon Sunday morning, so I'm going to go down to the altar and pray until I cry. And as I cry, I'm going to feel a release from this thing that I have been convicted by. And when I rise up a few moments later, I will be a totally different person. Now, that actually does happen. I know of a guy who was a particularly rough character, who fell in with the pastor and began to learn some truth, and showed up at the pastor's house late one night and handed the pastor his six-pack of beer and the cigarettes he just bought down at the liquor store, and his life was changed in a moment on his knees. It does happen. The problem is that man wasn't seeking that experience. He was seeking to know Christ. And in the Church of the Nazarene, we sometimes get so caught up in seeking these experiences that we begin to miss the truth of what it means to grow in Christ. I tell you this because we ought to be able to identify really well with what's going on in 1 Corinthians. Paul says in chapter 12, in verse 4, there are different gifts but the same Spirit. There are different ministries but the same Lord. There are different activities but the same God produces each gift in each person. A manifestation of the Spirit is given to each person for the common good. To one is given a message of wisdom through the Spirit, to another a message of knowledge by the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit, to another gifts of healings by one Spirit, to another the performing of miracles, to another prophecy, to another distinguishing between spirits, to another different kinds of tongues, and to another the interpretation of tongues. He says in verse 27, now you are all members of the body of Christ, individual members of it. And God has appointed these in the church. First apostles, second prophets, third teachers, next miracles, then the gifts of healing, helping, administration, various kinds of tongues. Are all apostles, are all prophets, are all teachers? Do all do miracles? Do all have gifts of healings? Do all speak in other tongues? Do all interpret? But eagerly desire the greater gifts. And we pause right there. And we say, yeah, we want the greater gifts. We want to do fantastic things and see amazing things and be part of incredible things. We want those experiences. And Paul says, yeah, but wait a minute. Wait a minute. Before we get into that, Paul says, something you all should know anyway, Paul says to the Corinthian church, before we get into dealing with your chaos in how you want to manifest spiritual gifts, before we get into that, he says, I'm going to show you an even better way. That's how my Bible interprets it. It's a difficult term to interpret. The word there is the word mega, not M-A-G-A. We're not making America great again. Mega as in huge, big. I want to talk about something mega. And the term means more surpassing. So even better isn't good enough. I really like the Bill and Ted version, the most excellent way, because I'm from that era. Thank you, you are too. Yes, I'll show you the most excellent way. But honestly, even that's not good enough. It would be like, now I will show you a still more, even better, more excellent way. So, Corinthian people, you have been chasing after these experiences. You have been celebrating the height of your chaotic worship services, out-paganing the pagans. We're now talking about how spiritual gifts ought to look in the church. We're going to get into the order of how things, he's actually going to give them an order of service here pretty soon. We're going to get down to the nitty-gritty of how things ought to look. But hold on, he says, even though we're going to do this because we have to, because you guys are way off the rails, even though we're going to do this, There is something so much more better, so much excellent beyond that, that you, eagerly desire the spiritual gifts. Yeah, go ahead. Later, he's going to tell them, pursue the better gifts. Yeah, that's fine. But listen, before we even get to that, there's something so much greater that you're missing. Something much greater that you should be pursuing. The idea of the language here is, if you would just pursue that, the other stuff wouldn't even matter. It just wouldn't even matter. They want to say, how is it that the world is going to recognize the Christian people of the Christian churches? Oh, through our fanaticism and through all this great stuff that we do. And Paul says, no, there's another way. Remember, the pagans acted like that. The pagans ran around and hooted and hollered in their worship and were chaotic. That's not going to help, he says. He tells them what Jesus says in John 13. He says, I give you another command, a new command. Love one another. Just as I've loved you, you're to love one another, and by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, in John 13:35, if you love one another. It's a new command. Jesus says, I'm giving you a new command. And you say, wait a minute, but Jesus already said the greatest commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. How can this possibly be a new command? Well, I'll tell you, and it's really cool. It has to do with the word that's used for love. The word is agape. You guys have heard that term. It seems so common to us. There's bookstores named Agape Bookstore. I've seen car mechanic places with the name Agape in their name. It just seems so common to us, the Agape Fellowship Church. It was really unusual. As a matter of fact, in all of written Greek classical or ancient history, the word agape is not recorded as a regularly used word until the New Testament. It's not that the word didn't exist, it's just that the Greeks couldn't use it. They didn't have a place for it until the New Testament. There are three other very common words that we might translate love. There are more than that the Greeks had, but there's three very common ones that you'll find in all kinds of classical writing. The first one is storge, which is affection. You know, I have a great affection for you. You're my brother. Love you, man. Great affection. The next one is eros. You're familiar with that. That is physical love or sexual love or passionate love. One that you know well as well is phileo, brotherly love. Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, also the city of getting murdered, but that's a whole other discussion. Phileo, brotherly love, love you as a brother. That was about it. That was it. The thing with storge and eros and phileo is that they're actually pretty self-focused. I mean, I have great affection for you, and I expect a return on this investment of affection. So, storge. That would be how I love my dog. I take care of my dog, I pet my dog, I have great affection for my dog, and I expect that if a bad guy comes in, he's going to take him down, and if he doesn't, no storge for you, get out of here. Right? Eros, erotic love. Well, yeah, because I expect a return on that. I expect, if I'm going to give you some sort of physical pleasure, I expect a return on that. Right? Brotherly love, phileo. Wendy really likes to watch these murder mystery shows, and there's often mobsters involved. And one thing I've learned about mobsters is family is so important. Till one of them does something you don't like, and then you just knock them off. Brotherly love has its limits. I will love you like a brother right up until the moment you betray me, and then no more. They're all self-focused. Agape is not. Agape is not a self-focused kind of love. So when Jesus says, I'm going to give you a new command, he doesn't say phileo one another. He says, no. Agape one another. Even as I have agape'd you. That kind of love. Paul says, I'm going to show you an even better, more than most excellent, high above anything else that you have dealt with so far. Something else for you to pursue that is way beyond. And if you will focus on pursuing this one thing, you will be Christian people. And everyone who encounters you will say, there is something radically different about those people that I'm not seeing anywhere else in the world, and it will fulfill your every need spiritually, socially, and physically as a body if you will pursue this one thing and give yourself to this one thing. And here's the deal, that hasn't changed. There's a lot of stuff in the New Testament that quite frankly doesn't apply, not directly, in 21st century America anymore. I mean, I don't ride a donkey. I don't know about you guys. I have a Ford truck. Culturally, that just doesn't fit. But agape, that hasn't changed. If a church determines to pursue agape, an assembly of believers, that's what a church is, a group of believers. If they determine to pursue that, they will be so radically different from all of the world that the world will say, there's something going on there. Now, I'll tell you, in parentheses, there are a lot of churches that pursue phileo. There are just a lot of them. And you know, they do a pretty good job of that. Brotherly love, taking care of one another, watching out for the least of these. They do a good job of that. They really do. Some of them pursue eros too, but there's a lot of them that pursue phileo. And you know what? Communities are glad to have those churches. They're glad to have those phileo-producing churches. They feed the homeless. They help keep the city clean. They do a lot of good stuff. Now, I'm not saying every church who feeds the homeless is only in it for that. Don't misunderstand me. Just saying there's a lot of assemblies of believers that pursue phileo. The thing of it is, there's a lot of other organizations that do that as well. I mean, there's a lot of really good organizations. One of the NASCAR drivers I really like has a foundation where he has actually invested heavily in children's hospitals for sick kids. That's really cool. Another one of the NASCAR guys that we like to follow, he and his girlfriend do this modeling thing where they have people come out for a big fashion show, and it's cute and fun, and people who shouldn't dress up in nice clothes are dressing up in nice clothes. And it's a big fundraiser, and they give it all away to children's cancer awareness and stuff like that. It's good. Man, that's some darn good phileo right there. As a matter of fact, we have a word for that in American English, and the word is philanthropy. Phileo, the brotherly love, anthropy, for man, brotherly love for fellow man. Yeah, that's good. But if we're going to be seen as different than the world, if people from the world around us are going to look and say, I really need to learn about that Christ, because there's something different about those Christian people. The only thing that's going to set us apart in a positive way is agape. So Paul says, yeah, go ahead. We're going to talk about preaching and stuff, sure. Oh, just hold your horses. We'll get to prophecy. Oh, don't worry. We'll spend some time in tongues. But before we get there, you got to understand, all that stuff is worthless without agape. So what is agape? What is it? What does the word mean? 1 John 4:10. Agape consists in this, not that we loved God, but that He loved us and sent His Son to be the atoning sacrifice for our sins. Or John 3:16, for God so agape'd people like you and I that He gave His one and only Son. What did He give Him for? To be the sacrifice. See, here's the difference between all those Greek words for love, and there's more of them. There's quite a few. I've heard people say, there's 7, there's 10. There's a lot. The Greek words for various types of affection are self-focused. Agape is not just others-focused, but it's others focused with sacrifice. To agape someone is to consider them so highly that you sacrifice yourself for them. You know, I've given you my little definition. It's what we refer to in junior high circles as the Brownie definition, that love is choosing to make the needs and interests of another more important than your own. We call it the Brownie definition because a 5-year-old was once asked, what's it mean to love somebody? And he said, love is when there's 2 brownies left in the pan and you give someone else the bigger one. And that's good. That's a good definition, except that agape goes further than that. Agape is you give both of the brownies away, and you go so far as to use the last little bit of your precious flour and cocoa powder to make more brownies to give away, with absolutely no intention that you're going to get any of them, just because you really think those other people should have some brownies. Agape is a giving with a tremendous sense of sacrifice. I can think of quite a few examples, and I'm sure you can as well, so maybe we won't dig too deep into that. Maybe we will simply move into 1 Corinthians chapter 13 with that understanding of what Paul's trying to do. There are some who say 1 Corinthians chapter 13, that's Paul's ode to love. That's a little poem he wrote, put in the middle of this letter. Not at all. This is Paul saying, if you're going to pursue spiritual gifts, you need to understand the greatest of all spiritual gifts. The spiritual gift that matters when, quite frankly, the others don't, is love. So if we're going to open a conversation, Paul says, about prophecy and speaking in tongues, we're not even going to go there until you guys have this nailed, until you guys understand what this is about. Because he says in chapter 13, verse 1, if I speak in human or angelic tongues. Now, can I just settle one thing really quick? Paul said if. He's using hyperbole. He's like using an example. He's not saying, because of the fact that I speak in human and angelic tongues. He's telling them, I could speak in any language on the planet or any language in heaven, theoretically. Theoretically, it still wouldn't do any good. If I don't have agape, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. I want to develop this more on Sunday. That little phrase is so key to understanding the rest of this that even though I have to develop it more on Sunday, I'm going to give you a preview this evening. Over in Exodus chapter 35, there is a description of the robe that the high priest would wear when he goes into the Holy of Holies. Nobody else could go in there but him. Now there's a problem with that. First of all, how do you know the priest is in there? Secondly, how do you know he's doing anything? You got to know. Well, there's bells on the bottom of his garment. Yeah. You hear the bells moving, you know the priest is, you hear dingy, 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 you know the priest is doing something in there. What is the priest doing in there in the Holy of Holies? He's doing spiritual work. He's doing the spiritual work. That is the typological connection of that high priest. He's doing the spiritual work. He has been given a spiritual task assigned by God to do a spiritual activity. Much like if I'm the pastor here, I've been given the spiritual role of being a pastor, and my spiritual task is to preach, right? One of them. Well, he's doing the spiritual work. He is manifesting the gifts of the Spirit in his life. Do you get the connection there? Okay, so he's got these bells on, and when the bells are ringing, we know that he's manifesting those spiritual activities. We can tell who is manifesting the activities, and we know that he's actually doing it. Now, here's the thing with the bells. We are told in many historical accounts that the ringing of the bells was beautiful, that the sound was fantastic, that the bells were tuned in such a way to ring in a great harmony, in a mighty chord together. It wasn't just dingy, dingy, dingy. They were beautiful sounding. And the key to making them sound beautiful was that the bells went every other bell, and in between the bell was a pomegranate. Bell, pomegranate, bell, pomegranate, bell, pomegranate. Now, every bell was different. That's how they got the harmony. But every pomegranate was the same. The pomegranates were woven. Now, if the pomegranates weren't there, the bells just clang into each other. They just make a noise. They don't even sound good. They just dang, 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 dang. They just make a noise. But by separating them with these woven pomegranates, it keeps them from banging into each other, and it limits the overring. You know how a bell will just keep ring, 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 ring? It limits the overring so that each bell chimes just as it's supposed to chime by the pomegranates. Now here's the cool thing. Old Testament typology, you can look it up all you want. You see it most in the Song of Solomon. Pomegranates refer to this kind of love. So what these bells on the bottom of his garment are telling us is that he's got all these spiritual gifts. And he is in the Holy of Holies right now manifesting those spiritual gifts. We can hear it. But they would sound horrible if it weren't absolutely, completely interlaced with this same heavy kind of love continuously. And because he's laced with this heavy kind of love, these sounds of the spiritual manifestation sound beautiful. Paul had to have been thinking of that as he wrote, if I speak in human or angelic tongues, if I have been given such a mighty spiritual gift that I can actually speak the language that God speaks sitting on his throne, but I am not interlaced with love. You know what it would be like, he says? It'd be like that big gong they have up on the hill to worship Aphrodite, and they smack that thing, and it just sounds horrible, and it just wakes you up, then it hurts your ears. It would be useless. It'd be like when we're waiting for the drummer on Sunday morning, and people want to practice music, but the drummer's not here yet, and I go, I'll get on the drums, and I get on the drums and start beating on the things, and it's a big mess. Gary knows, I see Gary smiling. It's a big mess. It sounds horrible. It has absolutely no value. But wait a minute. I'm hitting the drums. I'm usually even hitting them with some sort of a beat, but it has no value. Paul says, if I'm out there doing spiritual things, if I'm pursuing, now Gary's making fun of me, if I'm pursuing spiritual things, but I am not loaded with love, with this kind of love, this kind of deeply sacrificial love. I'm not seeking it with everything that I am. That is my goal. What I'm trying to achieve is to love others like Christ has loved me, to love him and love others like he's loved me. If I'm not doing that, then all I'm doing is making noise. A noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. Verse 2. If I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith that can move all mountains but do not have love, well, then I'm nothing. If I have the gift of prophecy, that is not fortune telling or future telling. Prophecy is God gives me specific words to say to you, and I say them. If I have that gift, but I don't say it with love. Imagine that your gas door on your car is open when you go to leave today, and you don't see that. And imagine that I say, hey Ed, hey man, listen, I'm really concerned somebody's going to steal the gas out of your car. Hold on just a second, I'm going to close the gas door for you, all right? What if I say, hey Ed, you moron, you left the gas door open? Do you hear the difference? If I tell you, by the way, Ed, you're not a moron. And I don't even know if your car has a gas door. If I tell you what God has told me, and I say, listen, I'm so concerned. I'm so concerned for you, and God has this message, and I need to share it with you, my people, my beloved. That's one thing. But if I say, you bunch of stinking losers, I might bring the same message, but it has a totally different tone. It's going to be useless. It's not going to be received. Even my dog knows this. I told my dog the other day, just sit down a minute. And he's like, no, I'm leaving. I said, oh, no, I'm sorry, sit down. Oh, he sat right down. You see? We understand this. If I have the gift of prophecy, and if I understand all mysteries. You know who understood all mysteries in the Bible? King Solomon. Solomon understood all mysteries. Matter of fact, Solomon in his day apparently had a greater understanding of biology than anybody else. He understood how leaves worked somehow. He understood how fish worked, all kinds of crazy stuff. So much so that the Queen of Sheba came to see him to learn some of this stuff. She wanted to know how this stuff worked. And I don't know how he knew. God says he bestowed him with special wisdom. He understood this stuff. He understood any mystery somebody could bring him. He would figure it out. And she spent quite a bit of time with him and learned, and she was amazed. And you know what she says? She said to the king in 1 Kings chapter 10, "The report I heard in my own country about your words and about your wisdom is true, but I didn't believe the reports until I came and saw it with my own eyes. Indeed, I wasn't even told half. Your wisdom and prosperity far exceed the report I heard. How happy are your men? How happy are these servants of yours who always stand in your presence hearing your wisdom? Blessed be the Lord your God. He delighted in you and put you on the throne of Israel because of the Lord's eternal love for Israel." You see, I can know a lot of stuff, like Neil deGrasse Tyson. You guys seen that guy on TV? He knows a lot of stuff. He is the noisiest gong and the clangingest cymbal, I think, currently in our modern culture. Because for all he knows, he doesn't know anything. Because he doesn't know God. He doesn't understand the love of God for humanity. I can understand all mysteries, but if I don't have the love of God, well, then it's useless. And I can have a faith so that I can move mountains. Now, I'm not entirely sure about, I skipped one. I skipped a good one. I can have all knowledge. I have known some preachers who have a lot of knowledge, but don't really have a lot of love. Have you met those guys? They don't accomplish much, do they? I have known people in my life who knew a lot of things, and they were things I needed to know. But they didn't present them with a lot of love. And I didn't learn a thing from them. Even though they knew things I needed to know, for some reason I was unable to absorb those things because they didn't have any love for me. You know what I'm talking about? I have known other people with a lot less knowledge who said, "I don't know, but I'm willing to figure it out with you because it matters to you." I've learned a lot from them. If I have all knowledge. And if I have all faith so that I can move mountains. Now, I don't know this for a fact, but I believe, I haven't been able to track down the specifics of, but I believe that phrase predates Jesus using it. If you have faith, you can move a mountain. I think that's an old rabbinical phrase, but I'm not entirely sure. I'm still working on finding that information. I'll let you know when I find it. But I believe that Jesus used it even as a euphemism. The greatest of faith can move mountains. And Paul says, if I have that kind, I might be wrong. I'll keep working on it. Paul says, if I have that kind of faith that can move mountains, faith so strong that the belief can move a mountain, but I don't have love, I am nothing. I might be able to speak in God's language and tell him the words that he gave me to say, and I might understand everything about everything. But if I don't have love, I am nothing. I am useless. I have no value. Now, hold on a second. Preachers always tell you, put your name in here. Troy is patient. Troy is kind. Troy is... Okay, that's fine. Go ahead. Go ahead. Think of yourself. Think of your own situation. But remember, I really want to look at this tonight from the perspective of the greater context of Paul writing to the Corinthian church. And he's telling them, you guys are doing all this great spiritual stuff. That's nice. But if you're not making the pursuit of agape the point of you getting together, if the point of you getting together as an assembly is not to pursue this agape from Christ and to pursue this agape for Christ, then guys, you're wasting your time. You're accomplishing nothing. You may as well just be pagans. Do you kind of get the tone? Paul says, and if I give away all, verse 3, if I give away all my possessions, and if I give over my body in order to boast, and I do not have love, I gain nothing. Remember, this kind of love is a giving kind of love. It's a sacrificing kind of love. And so Paul brings up these 3 points of devotion and sacrifice. If I give away all of my possessions, if I just give it all to the poor. By the way, did you know that Warren Buffett's working on that? He is. In 2006, he says, Warren Buffett, I got a letter here from him. I printed it off the internet. He didn't write it to me. I made a commitment to gradually give away all my Berkshire Hathaway stock to philanthropic foundations, and I couldn't be happier with that decision. And then he talks about Bill and Melinda Gates, because they're doing it too, apparently. He pledges to give 99% of his wealth to philanthropy during his lifetime or at death. Measured by dollars, this commitment is large. It is large. Did you know the guy's worth $115 billion? He's going to give away 99% of that. Do you know what that's going to leave him with? $1.15 billion. I don't know how he's going to make it. Nonetheless, he's going to give away 99% of that. Good for him. Good for him. He says some really good things in here, like this pledge does not leave me contributing the most precious asset, which is time. He's taking care of his sister Doris, he says, and a couple of other people. That's nice. He says, where's that one paragraph? He says, some material things may make my life more enjoyable. However, many would not. And so he wants to give to others. Where is that one? He has a quote. I guess I didn't print the quote. His quote essentially said that he knew that all this extra money wasn't going to do a thing for him. I mean, he can't spend that much money in one lifetime. Elon Musk can, but he can't spend that much money in one lifetime. And so he's going to make other people happy with the money. By the way, you know where he got the idea? Millions of people who regularly contribute to churches and other organizations thereby relinquish the funds that would otherwise benefit their own families. People who give to churches and other similar organizations. He saw us giving away. Now, that's just one of the clearest signs of agape love, is when churches do things like when we sent $2,500 down to Guatemala that we didn't have to spend because they'd had a bunch of flooding a few years back. And it just made us happy to give away that money. It just made us happy. And when we got a report a year and a half later of what that money had done, we were just overjoyed. And Warren Buffett said, well, I want to experience that kind of joy in my life, and I have $115 billion. I've seen what those church people do and how happy they are giving stuff away, giving it away to a point that it hurts, that it affects their lifestyle. He specifically says in this letter, I can give all this away, it won't affect my lifestyle at all. But I've seen these church people give in a way that affects their lifestyle, and I see how happy they are and how much they love. And I want that. So I'm going to give away 114 of 115 of my billions over the course of my life and at my death. However, if I give away all my possessions and don't have this agape, I gain nothing. You know what Jesus said about that? He said, you see these guys standing on the street corner praying? Making sure everybody can see him. Oh, Lord, take pity on me, the grandest of all sinners, and also the grandest of all. Isn't my hair nice today? He says, they've received their reward. They were praying so everybody else would know it. Everybody else knows it. They don't even need God to step in. They got what they were looking for. I'm really concerned for Warren Buffett. Don't know him personally. Might be a great guy. But I'm concerned that he's saying, look at me, give away my billions. Okay, I did. He gained nothing. He gained nothing from that. And if I give over my body in order to boast, Paul's talking, the euphemism, the language there tells us he's talking about being burned alive, which, you know, a person whose religious acts went against Judaism or paganism could face judgments like that. He says, if I determine that I'm going to be so countercultural that they burn me at the stake, as it were, in order to boast. So everybody can see how countercultural I am. Everybody can see that I am a Christian and I am willing to die for it. He says, well, that's useless. I've gained nothing. I'm going to stand before God, and God's going to say, so you were burned at the stake, huh? Oh, yeah, I still smell like smoke. Good. Why'd you do that? Did everybody see you? Is it good? Oh, yeah, everybody saw. They all thought I was great. Okay, good. You're done. You got what you were asking for. If I do these things, if I give from the depths, thinking I'm going to be agape-ing because I'm giving, but I'm not pursuing agape. I'm not pursuing this kind of love from God to me, from me to others, then I've gained nothing. By the way, if you wanted to have an outline of 1 Corinthians chapter 13, there are a couple of really famous old outlines that date back to I don't even know. One of them breaks down into 3 sections. Verses 1 through 3 is called the preeminence of love. Verses 4 through 7 is called the prerogative of love. And verses 8 through 13 is called the permanence of love. Or, if you don't like that one, there's another one I found. 1 through 3 is the value of love. 4 through 7 is the virtue of love. 8 through 13 is the victory of love. I didn't develop either of those. I just discovered them. Vernon McGee talks about them. You'll find them in some of the old Scottish commentaries. Those are not unusual. There's other ways of breaking it down. Insert words there where you want, but it breaks down that way. 1 through 3, 4 through 7, 8 through 13. I don't really break it down that way in my own mind. It seems like the beginning, Paul is trying to tell them, hey people, you're missing it. 4 through 7 is kind of his definition, if you will, of love. And 8 through 11, anyway, is kind of the point behind the thing in my own mind. He defines love this way. Love is patient. Long-suffering, your King James says. That's a good word. Paul goes to Jesus and he says, Andrew is getting on my nerves, but I have forgiven him. He is my brother. I have forgiven him 7 times today. I'm not doing it anymore. 7 times I have forgiven him today. Jesus is tough. Why don't you make that 70 times 7? You mean I got to count to 490? No, that's not the point. The point is you just keep right on forgiving. You have such an incredible... Where's the level of patience like that going to come from? That I got to put up with this guy being that way all day? It's because he is so much more important to you than you are. You are willing to give from the depths of your heart so deeply. Oh, I'll buy him a cheeseburger. I'll spend my last dollar for him. No. You're willing to give from the depths of your personhood so deeply that even if it makes you ashamed, you're just going to keep right on giving him forgiveness. Patience. Deep, desperate. You know, that's like the patience that a mama has for a son that committed a heinous crime and is spending life in jail. And every day she loves him, and every time she can, she goes and sees him, and she sends him letters and tries to take care of him, even though. Deep, long suffering because of this, and I'm suffering for a long time. People say, I don't know how I can forgive that person. They did a horrible thing to me, and I'm suffering. Suffer for a long time, and just keep giving away. You just keep giving away. Love is patient. Love is kind. Man, this is one we could use to know. Love is kind. I have to be kind of careful because I think that a lot of the activities that we as Christians do in activism are very valuable. The way that we stand up and speak out about the things in the culture, I think are very important. Imagine if we could just be kind about it. Instead of just saying, people shouldn't go see that movie. That's a horrible movie. We got to boycott that movie. Well, let's boycott every theater too. Matter of fact, let's not eat popcorn for a month. We don't accomplish anything except for looking crazy. Imagine if we could just be kind. Just say, that's not best. That's really hurting people that I care deeply about. If we could just... It's like road rage. What do you accomplish? What do you accomplish, these people yelling and screaming and flipping each other off and pulling their car over to the side so they can go yell at the guy? What are you're just being a jerk. I mean, yeah, but they made me late. They hurt my feelings. Yeah. But see, agape just gives all that away. You see? Imagine if we could just be kind. One of my favorite stories is the story about the Planned Parenthood and the Crisis Pregnancy Center that were in the same town. And the Crisis Pregnancy Center, the CEO was a man, and the Planned Parenthood CEO was a lady. They outgrew the Crisis Pregnancy Center, and so they found a new medical facility to move into. They rented half of a medical building. Well, at the exact same time, the Planned Parenthood rented the other half of the medical building. And they ended up side by side in here. True story. Think of the picket riots out front. Can you imagine? But what ended up happening, I can't tell you the whole story. I don't have time, and Wendy's going to shut me off. What ended up happening was the CEO of Planned Parenthood of the Crisis Pregnancy Center, who was a Christian man, was just so darn kind to the CEO and the employees of Planned Parenthood. Made sure their walk was shoveled in the snow. Oh, good morning, how you doing? He did not compromise his convictions a bit. He never supported anything they did. He was just so kind. Not to the picketers, that wasn't his thing. He was just kind to the workers. Just being kind. And that CEO of that Planned Parenthood became a Christian and turned her back on the abortion industry because the man was kind. Because agape love is like that. It's kind. It does not envy. That is, it doesn't look at what somebody else has and says, I should have that for myself. It doesn't envy. And the reason it doesn't envy is because it's happy when the other person has something good. Because when you have that kind of agape love for someone, if you had that thing already, you'd give it to them so that they could have it. You see? It can't possibly be envious. More quickly now, before she shuts me off. It's not boastful. It doesn't say, everybody look at me. Well, of course it doesn't say, everybody look at me, because you're so busy giving away. You know, Mother Teresa was given Rolls Royces by, I can't remember, Wendy might remember, one of the Indian sultans gave her some Rolls Royces because she's such an important person. She should travel in comfort and style. And she sold them and gave the money away because she doesn't need that kind of attention. I mean, she could use that for the kingdom instead. It's not boastful, and it's not arrogant. The word literally means to be puffed up, to be blowing yourself up. No real substance in there, but hey, you be you. Yeah, I'm the best at, I don't know what, but I'm just the best at it. And here's the problem with arrogance. In order to be arrogant, you generally have to put somebody else down. We all know deep inside that we're not better than the guy next to us. We all know that deep inside. So in order to make ourselves better, we have to push them. We can't stand any taller, so we have to make sure that they get pushed shorter, right? Agape love doesn't do that. Instead, agape love looks at the guy next to him and says, how can I make you taller? Instead of how can I lift myself up? Arrogant. It is not rude. Literally means it does not act unbecomingly. Man, this is another one that we really need to understand. Another word would be unseemly. Another term might be weird. It's not weird. It's not acting in a way that's weird. Man, if you got Christian people acting weird, and people from the world are looking at it and saying, man, that's not becoming. I don't want to be like that. That doesn't seem right. That's weird. That's probably not agape love. I mean, I'm not saying it's fully culturally acceptable at all times. Some people think we're weird because we get up early on a Sunday morning and come down here and sing. But I think you know what I'm getting at. Where was I? It's not rude. It's not self-seeking. Obviously, it can't be self-seeking because it's seeking others' goods. It's not irritable. I had to look up the word. I wanted to know specifically what we were talking about. And it comes from the term to sharpen. In other words, it's not poking one another. You're not irritating one another by poking at them. Like sitting on a tack. You're not irritating one another. Agape love doesn't do that. Agape love doesn't irritate one another. I understand iron sharpens iron. I'm not talking about sandpaper. I'm talking about poking. I understand that there are times when we do sand each other. We do rub up against each other. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about being a pain in somebody's rear. Agape love doesn't do that. It's not irritable. And this is a good one. It doesn't keep a record of wrongs. Man, that's probably the one part that people ought to quote when they're at their wedding and they want to quote out of 1 Corinthians chapter 13. They ought to quote that. Love doesn't keep a record of wrongs. It literally means that. It uses the term for debt reckoning. We're not writing it down. Well, you did this last time, and you did this time. Of course not, because if you truly love somebody, you're looking for the best. Love finds no joy in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth. I was studying this, and I heard John Corson tell a story of a man who purchased a lottery ticket, and he won like $100 and some odd million, but he didn't know it, and the lottery ticket was in the pocket of his shirt, and he put his shirt in the laundry, and it destroyed the lottery ticket. And everybody's like, woohoo, he didn't win, I can win next time. No, love doesn't do that. No, love finds no joy in unrighteousness, like when the bad guy gets killed and we're like, woohoo. No, love doesn't find joy in unrighteousness. Like when our enemy has something go wrong, when the person we're struggling with at work has a bad day. Come on, we deal with this a lot. We're like, whew, they deserved it. No, not agape love that's always giving. Doesn't find joy in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth. When the truth comes out, we rejoice. Verse 7, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. I read that quickly because, number one, I'm running short on time, and number two, we tend to think when we get to verse 7 that this sounds an awful lot like a doormat. This sounds like somebody that's just giving, no matter what happens. But that is just not the case. Our children like to say, this is just who I am, and if you really loved me, you'd support me in this. No. Not if the thing that you're pursuing leads you to destruction. I'm not going to support you in that. Well, if you really loved me, you just accept me as I am. No. Not if the lifestyle you're pursuing, if the choices you're making, the person you want to hang out with, the way you want to spend your money, not if that leads to destruction. I'm not going to support you in that. I tell my high schoolers all the time, don't go to state college. I know that offends some people. I don't care. Don't let your high schoolers go to state college. It's bad news. That's the worst place they need to be, is in a state college. And that's a general statement. I'm sure there's some wonderful state colleges out there, just maybe not locally. So don't let your high schoolers go to state college. And when one of them comes to me and says, I've decided to go to state college, I say, well, I love you. I don't like your decision. I don't support that. And they say, well, aren't you going to, raise money for my scholarship? And aren't you? No, actually, I'm not. Because I think you're making a really bad decision. I'm not going to support you making a bad decision. That's not okay. I mean, imagine if you're like, hey, I've decided to chop my arm off with a chainsaw. Are you going to buy me a chainsaw? No. In Proverbs it talks about this a lot. I pulled just a few of them, just a handful of them. You guys know Proverbs 13:24. Everybody knows this one. Spare the rod, spoil the child. That's right. If you don't, and the idea there is if you don't discipline your child to grow to become something better, and if you just, go ahead, everybody gets a trophy, well, then that's what you get. Proverbs 10:17, whoever heeds discipline shows the way of life, but whoever ignores correction leads others astray. If you're not helping them with correction, you're leading them astray. 12:1, whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but whoever hates correction is stupid. That's pretty clear. Folly, 22:15, folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will drive it far away. No, if you really love somebody and you're really giving to them, people say, well, I didn't say anything about that because I love them and I don't want to upset the relationship because the relationship is just so much more important. No, if you're really giving, you're even willing to give up the relationship with them if that's what it takes to get them back on the right track. Paul talked about that back in 1 Corinthians chapter 5. When there was somebody way off on the wrong track, doing some seriously rough stuff. And everybody's like, but this is our church member and this is important to us. And Paul says, tough, kick them out. They'll figure it out. And it worked. We'll read about it when we get to 2 Corinthians. It worked. Yeah, you're not being a doormat. You're giving and giving and giving. What are you giving for? Just to make them feel good? No, to represent Christ to them. And you never see Christ pat the adulteress on the shoulder and say, that's okay, go back to bed. He says, go and leave your life of sin. I have set you free. I have sacrificed myself, he says. I have given myself away. I have caused myself great harm so that you can be free. Now, go and be free, you see. I guess we don't have time to get to the last bit of this, but we will on Sunday. So, yes, ma'am. The last section, I've got it. They're not my outlines, and so I'll read you the whole outline just in case somebody else wanted some more. There are two of them that I wrote down. Verses 1 through 3 is the preeminence of love. Verses 4 through 7 is the prerogative of love. And verses 8 through 13 is the permanence of love. Or 1 through 3 is the value of love. 4 through 7 is the virtue of love. And 8 through 13 is the victory of love. And we will deal with we'll deal with 8 through 13. I honestly thought we would have extra time tonight. I honestly did. We will deal with, Wendy laughs. We will deal with 8 through 13 on Sunday, and I'm really looking forward to that. Oh, it's so fantastic. How I want to be a church of people like that. I tell you what. I want people to drive by the building and say, something's going on in there, and I need to be part of that. I don't even know what those people are doing, but I need to be part of that. Like the people across the street who said, why'd you come weed my garden? This place was a mess. Why'd you come and spend your time weeding it? You guys didn't have anything better to do on a beautiful, sunny weekday in the middle of summer? No, it's because Christ gives to us, and we want to be able to give away, and it's just, I don't know, just a silly, simple way to give away. Come crawl around and pull your weeds. So, Norville says it wasn't so simple. Let's pray. Thank you, Lord, for loving us like this. How I pray you will make us a church that loves in this way. Oh, help us to love. We thank you, Lord. Amen.